Good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Today is part two of our two-part series on scientific reasoning. So, for those of you that were with me yesterday, welcome back. For those of you who are just now tuning in, don't go away. Just because it's part two, you can still get a lot out of it. The way that we have been doing these webinars currently is we have one day of content, that's part one, and then one day of a practice test, that's part two. But if you weren't here for content, this can still be a really valuable experience because you can get an idea of what questions will look like on the TEAS and how your skill set aligns with those questions. And then you can take that knowledge and go from there. When I talk about taking that knowledge and going from there, it might mean you want to turn to the myriad of resources that we have here at Archer Review for you to help you study smarter, not harder in preparation for that TEAS. So yesterday I went over our question bank. Our question bank is unparalleled. We've got over 2,000 questions with rationale that explains why the correct answer is the correct answer and why the incorrect answers are incorrect. And almost all of those 2,000 questions have videos attached to them as well that goes right to the specific point, the timestamp of that topic, so that your time is spent on only the topic you need help with. And that's what I'd like to shine the spotlight on today is our on-demand videos, because our on-demand videos are also pretty amazing. Not only are they insightful and full of lots of information and tagged right at the topics you need, but you also get some extras with that. So I wanted to just point those out. So we're in scientific reasoning. So I'm just pulling up one of our videos. This is on S4.1, scientific measurement and tools. If you were to watch the whole video, it's right around 20 minutes long. But what we like in these is that what if you just need to remember how to convert milligrams to hectograms? Or what if you need to remember how to look at the appropriate tool for volume? You can go right to that spot. And these are short 1-minute moments in time, so you can get what you need literally on demand. But the other thing that I wanted to show you about these is what you get with them. Not only do you get the video, which is packed full of all the stuff that you need to know for the TEAS, but you also get cheat sheets, and they are spectacular. I love our cheat sheets. They're beautiful. Look at how pretty that is. And they're full of the key ideas. They're full of all the things you need to know, like the base units. They give you tips. They give you that nice conversion chart. So, remember yesterday, if you were with me, we converted 5 meters to 5 millimeters by moving 3 decimal places. You'd have that chart available to you. Example problems, measurement tools, key ideas, and it's just chocked full of so many amazing things. The other thing too then is you can have the slide set as a handout. So I know some students, if you have the ability to print, like to print these, and then as they watch the video, they will annotate with the instructor, or they will jot down comments and information to help them remember, or little tips and tricks and things like that. If you don't have the ability to print, that would be okay too, but it just gives you the opportunity to follow along with your instructor. So I love showing you guys all of this. These cheat sheets are just spectacular. The notes are amazing. And it's just one of the myriad things we have available for you to help you be successful on the TEAS. Of course, we also then have other things such as tutoring. Let me skip ahead and show you who we are. So as you probably know, if you've been to any of my science webinars before, I'm Shellie Harshberger. My experience, it was in the classroom, both at the college level and the high school level with anatomy and physiology, biology, chemistry, all of those. So I can certainly help you out there. Then we've got Tammy with English and reading, and we've got Brandon with math. Everybody's an expert in their topic, and they would be eager to help you out. Furthermore, since you're here, you know that we have free live webinars. Welcome. I'm so, so glad you are here. We have been packed full of webinars this week. This is the 4th one I've taught this week. So we changed them up. Right now, we've been doing this 2-part system, but I know that July is going to bring about a new approach, and we like to keep it fresh for you. But if ever you're not able to attend our free live webinars and you're getting down to the wire and you're ready to really, dig deep because you got that tease right around the corner, you can certainly rewatch old webinars as well. But as I talked about all the wonderful things we have available for you, I'd be remiss if I didn't share that we do have discounts if you bundle. So if you want to bundle pretty much everything we have available except private tutoring, that's our SurePass. If you want to include an hour of private tutoring, that's our SurePass Pro. And this way, when you bundle all that stuff together, then you can save a little bit of money. So give that some thought. And then lastly, before we dive into our practice test today, I do want to encourage you, if you are not following us on all the socials, please do. Each week, we put out 2 practice questions and 2 mini lessons, and those are free, and they're short, and they're sweet, and they're right to the point. I know most recently we worked on chemistry, and we did acids and bases and buffers. So those are out there. You can go back on our social pages and find them. So check us out on TikTok, Insta, and Facebook. Follow us. Also, if you need anything or if you're trying to book a tutoring appointment and you can't seem to find a time, email us at prenursing@archerreview.com. There are times that we can work around our schedules, your schedules, and try to accommodate you. So it doesn't ever hurt to ask. Now, as we dive into our practice test today, I want to just give you a little bit of information about format. First of all, if you signed up and you are viewing this via Zoom, you get the benefit of a little bit of privacy when you put your answers out into the chat because I'm the only one who sees those answers. Your peers do not. So please put your answer out there with comfort knowing that I will never, ever, ever judge you. If you're coming at me on any of the socials, yes, your peers will see your responses, and I'm hoping you'll still put those responses out in the chat. The more senses we activate, the better we remember. So if you put the wrong answer out there and you learn from it, when you're sitting there taking that TEAS and you see a similar question, you'll be able to say, oh yeah, that's right. That's that one I got wrong. But I learned, I figured it out when I had the webinar. And so it helps you stay engaged and it helps you remember. So please do participate. This is set up like a TEAS exam in the context that each question will be timed. So I will set a timer for 45 seconds. I will read the question and then I will leave you to figure out what you believe is the correct answer, throw it out in a chat, and then when that timer goes off, we will go through the responses together, figure out what's the correct answer, what's the incorrect answer, and why. Okay, without further ado, we are going to get started. So our first topic is scientific measurement. Our first question, a student is measuring the volume of a liquid in a graduated cylinder. To obtain an accurate reading, where should the student measure the liquid's volume? I'm going to get that timer going. You guys get your answers out there. Okay, are we ready for the big reveal? The correct answer is B. So if you remember when we went through this yesterday, if you participated, the lowest point of the meniscus, the bottom of that curve, is where we're measuring. So in this particular visual that I pulled over from yesterday's content, we can see that each tick mark on the graduated cylinder is 1. And so when we get to 20 and we're over 1, but we're not at 22, we start looking in closely and we see that we're measuring it right here. Okay? All right, so let's take a look at our other responses. A, at the highest point of the liquid surface. No, that would be an inaccurate representation of the liquid. It would not give you the correct amount of liquid. B is our correct answer. C, at the middle of the liquid's curve. No, we need to be at the lowest point of that meniscus. And then D, at the top of the container. Well, that's just illogical if we're trying to measure the liquid's volume and not how much that container can completely hold. Those are two different things that we would be trying to figure out. All right, let's take a look at our next one. A nurse needs to administer 1 gram of a medication to a patient. However, the pharmacy only provides the medication in 250 milligram tablets. How many tablets should the nurse administer? How'd you do? Our correct answer is C, 4 tablets. So let's break this one down. So our correct answer was C, 4 tablets. How did we come up with that? Well, we have to remember that 1 gram equals 1,000 milligrams, and each tablet was 250 milligrams. So we need to have 1,000 milligrams divided by 250 equals 4 tablets. Or I just kind of logically try to think in my head, okay, well, if we need 1,000 milligrams and I have 250, 250 plus 250 is 500. Okay. Another 250 is 750. Another 250, that gets to my 1,000. Oh, there we go. There's our 4 tablets. So you could kind of think of that logically as well. Now let's take a look at our other responses. A said 2 tablets. 2 tablets would have been 500 milligrams, and that would have only been a half of a gram. So we needed more than that. B, 3 tablets, that would have been 750 milligrams, or a quarter of a gram. So that would, I'm sorry, or 3/4 of a gram, my bad. And that still would not have been enough. Or D, 5 tablets. 5 tablets would have been 1,250 milligrams, or 1.25 grams, and that would have been too much. All right, our next topic, interpret and evaluate scientific information. Which of the following are characteristics of empirical evidence? Select all that apply. Let's see how we did. Our correct answers are A, C, and E. So let's break those down. A, C, and E. Empirical evidence A is based on direct observation or experimentation. Remember, we talked about yesterday that scientific information is based on this idea of empirical evidence. And 2 of their key characteristics is direct observation, something that they directly witnessed, and or experimentation. C, measurable and repeatable. Yes, scientific experiments have to be something that is very succinctly measured and reproducible so that someone else could come along, do that exact experiment, and get the same results. That's how we gain confidence in that scientific information. D, collecting using systematic methods. Yeah, we talked about yesterday how it's not quite as perfectly linear as the scientific method would teach us in elementary school, but it does generally start with some sort of observation, minimal data collection to form the hypothesis, and then basing our experiment on proving or disproving that hypothesis, and then following up with analyzing our data and drawing conclusions. That is, somewhat how the process typically goes in 99% of the cases. All right, so let's break down what's wrong with B, what's wrong with D. Well, B says primarily subjective and influenced by personal opinion. We try really hard as scientists to be objective, not putting our personal bias on our observations and on our interpretations of results. And we try to do that same thing with personal opinion. We try to avoid both of these things, so that is not empirical evidence. D, derived from logical reasoning alone. Logical reasoning does play a part, but the problem here is the word alone. Because it's not just logical reasoning, it's direct observation, it's experimentation, and all the other characteristics that we just talked about. Okay, let's take a look at our next one. And thank you so much for those of you that are participating. I really appreciate that. In an experiment, what is the purpose of the independent variable? Get those responses out there. Okay, I saw some correct answers. Let's take a look. Our correct answer is C. So well done, because I saw quite a few correct answers. So let's take a look. It is intentionally changed to observe its effect. The independent variable is the thing we want to know. Will this have an impact? Yesterday, we talked about migraine medicine, and we said if we have a new migraine medicine, we want to see if that is going to minimize the symptoms of migraine sufferers. So administering that migraine medicine would be the thing that we're intentionally changing, and we want to observe the effect. We want to observe if it decreases their symptoms. Now let's take a look at A. A, it remains constant throughout the experiment. That would be a controlled variable, or constant, sometimes they say. Remember, we talked yesterday about how, let's say you aren't feeling very good and you take aspirin, and then you think, oh, maybe I've got a headache because I haven't had enough water today. And so then you start drinking a lot of water, and come that evening, you feel really well. You're like, I'm feeling great. Are you feeling great because of the aspirin? Or are you feeling great because of drinking more water? You don't know, because you changed other variables. We have to have all of our other variables exactly the same and only change one. That way we know that it's the aspirin that got rid of our headache, or the water that got rid of our headache. So that's what a constant is. It's all the variables we keep the same so that we can really have a good conclusion based on our independent variable. B, it is the factor that is measured in response to change. That's the dependent variable. The dependent variable. That is, if we stick with my headache example, that is the outcome, the decreased symptoms. The headache went away. That's the dependent variable. What happens in response to the independent variable? D, it serves as a baseline for comparison. Now, D would be a control group. Typically, in medical studies, we will have an experimental group, if we stick with my migraine example, that would be getting the migraine medication. And we would get a control group that would get a placebo. It isn't actually the real medication. And they would be the baseline that we could compare the experimental group to ensure that the symptoms had changed and that this medication did work, or that they didn't change and the medication didn't work. Which of the following best describes the purpose of a control group in the experiment? Get those answers out there. All right. I fear I gave this one away in the previous question, but that's okay. Our correct answer was B. The control group is serving as our baseline. It's what we're comparing the experimental group to. Let's take a look at the others. A, to receive the treatment being tested. That would be our experimental group. C, to ensure that all variables remain constant. That would be our controlled variables or our constants. D, to intentionally manipulate the results. That would be bad. We don't want to intentionally manipulate the results. That would be adding bias and actually being unethical in our experimental behavior. All right, let's take a look at our next one. What is the function of a placebo in medical trials? We have some people knocking it out of the park. You guys are getting it. I'm so impressed. Our correct answer is C, and many of you knew that. So very, very well done. So C is to serve as an inactive substance for comparison with the actual treatment. So a placebo is generally just a sugar pill. Let's take a look at our other responses. A, to provide an alternate form of treatment. No, we would not want an alternate form of treatment. That would be introducing another variable, and then we really wouldn't have an idea of what our independent variable, its impact. B, to ensure every participant receives active medication. Unfortunately, no, that's not the case. And people typically know that. People will sign their contract when they participate in a medical study that says they may or may not receive the active medication. D, to measure how different independent variables interact. There's only ever one independent variable. If we include any more variables, we have no idea which one had impact. Which of the following are important factors when analyzing design of an experiment? Select all that apply. Let's see how we did. A, B, D. Let's take a look. A, B, D. Let's break them down. A, ensuring a large sample size and repeated trials for reliability. The more participants, the larger the sample size, the better the results, the better that we can depend on the results. And we want to make sure that we can repeat that experiment over and over and get the same results. That gives us confidence in those results. B, keeping all conditions except the independent variable constant. And I've kind of hammered that one home a lot. We want to keep every single thing constant except for that independent variable. So if we go to my migraine example and we have an experimental group that's receiving the migraine medication and we have a control group that's not, we're still going to expect those participants to keep their day-to-day life exactly the same, get the same amount of sleep they always do, eat the same foods they always eat, be under the same amount of stress or lack of stress they're always under. We want to keep all of that the same so that we can depend on the results of that independent variable being only the independent variable's effect and nothing else. Skipping down to D, maintaining controlled variables across all groups. And that's what I talked about, keeping everything controlled or constant, keeping everything about their life the same as normal so that we can truly rely on those results. All right, let's take a look at what's wrong with C and E. C, allowing participants to choose whether they receive the treatment or placebo. That would be introducing bias, and we will actually assess for that later, so I'm not going to get too crazy and give answers away. E, changing multiple variables at once to see various effects. Again, that goes back to if I have a headache and I take aspirin and I drink excess water that day and I feel better later, which made me feel better? We don't know. We have to change one variable at a time. All right, what is the primary purpose of a double-blind study? Correct answer is A, and I saw some correct answers out there, so very, very well done. Let's break it down. A, to ensure that neither the participants nor the researchers know who is receiving treatment or placebo. This is that concept of bias that I was talking about. Sometimes psychological expectations can influence how we feel or how we perceive something. And so if neither the researcher nor the participants know who's getting the medication or who's getting that migraine medication, then we can try to remove as much bias as possible from that experiment. Now let's take a look at our others. B, to allow researchers to decide which participants receive the treatment. That would be bias for just boldly. We talked about yesterday, an example of that is if a company has a diet pill and they go out and they choose all young, 20-something fit people who eat really, really healthy, that's going to have an impact on their results than if they actually choose a heterogeneous group of all ages, all races, all lifestyles. And so bias comes into play when they decide which participants are receiving treatment. C, to test multiple variables at the same time for efficiency. And you've heard me kind of hammer that one home a lot. We only want to test one variable, not multiple. D, to guarantee that every participant receives some form of treatment. And unfortunately, that's not the case. A control group is not going to receive any form of treatment. They're going to have a placebo. Which of the following are important guidelines for recognizing bias in an experimental design? Select all that apply. Okay, let's see how we did. A, B, D are our correct answers. A, B, D. Let's break it down. A, ensuring participants are randomly assigned to avoid skewing comparisons. This is what I had talked about, how we need a heterogeneous group. We need a group of all lifestyles, all ages, gender, race, the whole 9 yards, so that we have an accurate representation of the population. B, using blinding, single or double, to reduce bias from expectations. Now remember, double blinding is that the researchers and the participants, neither one of them knows who's getting the treatment, who's getting the placebo. Single blinding means the researchers know, but the participants don't. D, being aware of potential conflicts of interest or funding sources that could influence results. That's a big one. As a nurse on the front lines with your patients, when they come in and they've seen an advertisement for a medication, you need to be able to look at the study for that medication and say, well, the company that made the medication published the study. There's probably a conflict of interest here. There's probably a lot of room for bias because the funding is influencing the results. It's generally a good idea in situations like that to have a third party experiment, someone else that's not funding it, to test it, to truly trust that the medication does what it says it does. Let's take a look at C and E. What's wrong there? C, allowing researchers to selectively assign participants to groups. And this is what we talked about earlier. If it's a diet pill and we pick all 20-something fit people who eat really well, that's going to really mess up our results. So we can't have that. That is not an accurate ethical way to perform that experiment. E, choosing participants based on expected outcomes to confirm hypotheses. No, scientists have to stay really neutral and let the experimental results tell them, is my hypothesis accurate or do I need to refute it? Is it inaccurate? All right, we have an example here. Let's check it out. A researcher is studying the effect of a new allergy medication on symptom severity. One group of patients takes the new medication, while another group does not. After 2 weeks, the researcher records the severity of allergy symptoms in each participant. Which of the following correctly identifies the independent variable and the dependent variables in this experiment? All right, let's reveal and see how we did. Our correct answer is B. This is our correct answer. So the independent variable is that administration of the medication. We're giving out medication. The dependent variable is how were their allergy symptoms? Were they less severe? That's what we're hoping for, right? And so that those allergy symptoms depend on the administration of the medication. And that's one way to figure out which is which. The allergy symptoms severity depends on whether they have a response to the medication that was administered. Breaking down the others is a little hard because that's pretty straightforward, but let's try it. A, independent variable, allergy symptom severity, dependent variable, whether or not the patient takes the medication. Ultimately, you could kind of reverse that and say, independent variable, taking the medication, dependent variable, allergy symptoms, and that would make that accurate. Let's take a look at C. Independent variable, time of day the medication is taken, dependent variable, type of allergy medication used. This is one where we can apply some good test taking strategies. When you get a passage like this on the TEAS, really look closely at, is there anywhere in there that it talks about the time of day? Is there anywhere in there where it talks about the type of allergy medication? If so, that's kind of a red flag that that question, that answer doesn't even apply because there's no mention of the time of the day and there's no mention of the type of the allergy medication. So even if you weren't certain on the independent dependent variable, you could rule C out just based on the information you were given. Let's take a look at D. Independent variable, pre-existing allergy conditions, dependent variable, dosage of medication given. Again, I would look back to my passage and I'd say, there's no discussion about the pre-existing allergy conditions, and there's no discussion about the dosage. If they didn't put it in the passage, it's not going to be a probable answer. And so then really all you needed to do is differentiate between A and B. So those are just some test taking strategies for you. All right, we are on to our third segment, our final segment. So you guys are doing so good sticking with me. I love it. Thank you for being here. I don't know where you're at, but where I'm at, it is a rainy Friday afternoon. In that case, it's great that we're getting to hang out together because I certainly don't want to be outside right now. So let's take a look at our next one. Which of the following lists the levels of biological organization in the correct order from smallest to largest? And you know what? I'm going to actually just keep the time myself because I see that it is showing it on the screen there in front of you. So I've got the timer going, but I don't want it to hide one of your answer responses. Okay, how'd we do? Our correct answer is C. So let's take a look at our visual, and then I want to go back and I want to focus on test taking strategies again. So C told us that atoms make up molecules, which make up organelle, which are inside cells, which work together to form tissues, which work together to form the organs within the organ system that makes up the organism. Now, that was C. Let's take a look at, again, test taking strategies and see if we can rule some out in case you kind of got it mixed up in the middle and you just really weren't sure. Well, one of the first things you want to do is try to remember what was the smallest and what was the largest. Start there. And typically, in most cases, you can rule them out. You can rule a couple of them out. So I'm going to look at the largest at the end, and I see, well, they were pretty tricky because every single one of them ended in the organism. So it didn't work, but sometimes it might have ended with organ system or something silly like that, and you could have ruled that out. But now let's take a look at the beginning. If at the beginning you remembered that atoms make up molecules, now you can rule A and D out immediately. And so now, once again, you were just between B and C. So if you see how these test taking strategies, things like this, then if you have to guess, you have a 50-50 shot at it. And that's a greater probability than a 1 out of 4. So I like to throw those in there to help you out. So let's go a little farther down B and see if there would have been other ways to figure it out, even if you didn't fully know. So atoms make up molecules, so far so good. But then look at this. Look at this relationship here. Cells make up organelles. Think about that. I often say that organelles are like organs inside cells. They're like tiny little organs inside the cell. So you can kind of think of the cell for this purpose of as being its own independent unit. And just like humans have all these organs in our bodies so that we can function as an independent unit, a cell has all these organs, organelles, inside it so it can function as an independent unit. And if you remember that, then you know that a cell doesn't make up an organelle makes up a cell. All right, our next one. How does the sequence of events in a biological process demonstrate a cause and effect relationship? Okay, let's see how we did. B, our correct answer is B. Earlier events directly influence or determine the outcome of later events. This one I always find really interesting because there's a couple of questions in here that I'm like, not unless there was time travel. Let's take a look. A, each event happens randomly without influencing the next step. If events are happening randomly, then there really isn't a relationship there, whether it's cause and effect or not, there's no relationship. And since the question is asking about a relationship, we can definitely rule out A. C, later events influence earlier events in the sequence. That's where I say we need time travel. Something that happens later on can't jump back and influence something that happened earlier in the day. That's illogical. But I will say that that's another test taking strategy in that when you're taking the test, you can be stressed, and stress sometimes influences your logic. So when you first start taking the test, if you have any questions that you kind of mold over or you're just unsure of, flag them so that you can come back to them later. Because generally, when we sit down, we're a ball of nerves. But typically, those nerves will even out. And so you can go back to those earlier questions when your nerves have calmed down and you might catch any of those silly mistakes you might have made. Let's take a look at D. All events happen simultaneously with no connection between them. Of course, again, this idea of no connection between them then suggests that there is not a relationship. And if there's not a relationship, then this is clearly an incorrect answer. Which of the following correctly describes the sequence of events in a feedback loop? How do we do? Our correct answer is B, and I saw a lot of correct answers out there. So nice round of applause to you. If you're all by yourself, pat yourself on the back. Well done. All right, so let's look at our visual that I brought from our lesson yesterday and get a feel for why B was our correct answer. So in a feedback loop, we start with an initial stimulus. Let's say it's cold outside, and that impacts a variable. Our body temperature decreases if I'm sticking with my cold outside example. And receptors in our skin notice, oh, we're cold. Receptors in our body notice, oh, our body has decreased lower than our 37 degrees Celsius or 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. And that sends a signal to our control center, which is typically our brain. And that says, yeah, our body is too cold relative to our set point of 37 degrees Celsius. So it sends out effectors to alter that variable. In the case of being cold, we would get goosebumps, we would shiver, our blood vessels would constrict to keep our core warm. And that hopefully then would bring our body temperature back up to that 37 degrees. Now, let's take a look at our other answer responses because we can certainly apply that test-taking strategy idea again in this scenario. So when I look at A, the first thing I see here with the first phrase, control center evaluates change, is, but we didn't get the change yet. That's my first one. The second thing, too, that I see is that A ends with initial stimulus. Well, the initial stimulus is what needs to be created first in order for something to get to the control center to say that there is a change. So that rules it out. And so then I take a look at the others and I notice my idea of, if you look at the beginning and the end, how it takes you home. C and D also end in initial stimulus. So I rule them out right there. And B was our logical answer. And you didn't even have to know all the steps. All you had to know is that we're not going to end in an initial stimulus. That's what sets the chain of reaction off. And so that may be the logical answer. All right. Which of the following statements correctly describe positive and negative feedback loops? Select all that apply. And I'm going to hide that timer again so it's not in you guys' way. Let's see how we did. A, B, and E. And I do see those correct answers out there in many, many cases. So you are knocking it out of the park, folks. Let's break it down. A, negative feedback loops work to restore stability by reversing a change in a variable. Yes. As I said yesterday, put negative feedback loop and homeostasis, tie those two together in your brain. The whole point of negative feedback loops is to maintain balance, homeostasis. B, positive feedback loops enhance or amplify a change until a specific outcome is reached. And I said yesterday, tie this word amplify to positive feedback loops in your brain. Positive feedback amplifies to a point. It amplifies till the baby is born. It amplifies until you stop a wound from bleeding excessively. It sends platelets so that the wound quits bleeding excessively. All right, E, negative feedback loops help regulate body temperature, blood sugar levels, and blood pressure. Yes, the majority of our body is regulated by a negative feedback loop. Okay, or I should say, the majority of homeostasis, everything that's going on in our body is regulated by negative feedback loop, not positive feedback loop. Those are the exceptions. Negative feedback loop is what's monitoring all of our homeostatic balances. Now let's take a look at C and D. C, negative feedback loops push the body farther away from homeostasis. That's completely untrue, but we could say that positive feedback loops do. They do push the body farther away from homeostasis to a set point. The child is born, the wound quits bleeding, things like that. D, positive feedback loops are more common in maintaining daily physiological balance. No, negative feedback loops are. They maintain our daily physiological balance. Which of the following scenarios is an example of a negative feedback mechanism? Welcome back. How'd we do? B. B is our correct answer. B is our example of a negative feedback mechanism. Let's take a look. When body temperature rises, sweat glands activate to cool the body down. Remember, negative feedback is trying to get us back in balance. Okay, that is the goal of negative feedback. Now let's take a look at the others. A, during childbirth, contractions increase in intensity until the baby is delivered. See this increase in intensity? That could also mean amplify, and that would be positive feedback mechanism. C, a blood clot forms rapidly at the site of an injury to stop excessive bleeding. Same idea. That is a positive feedback mechanism. D, the release of oxytocin during breastfeeding continues as the baby nurses. Yes, that release of oxytocin is there to stimulate the bond between the mother and the child. That is continuing, amplifying to a set point as the baby nurses. So that is also positive feedback mechanism. Oh, you guys have been so great. Thank you for being with me on a Friday afternoon. Hopefully, yours isn't rainy like mine. I always like to bring this page back up just in case you missed it at the beginning. If you have an iPhone and you take a screenshot, those QR codes will typically work. If you have an Android, you can still take a screenshot. They won't work on the Android, but you will have all of those email address, or not email, all of those web addresses to take you to all the wonderful resources we have available for you. Next, remember you can bundle. So that way you can save a little bit of money. You can get all of the products, or you can get all the products with an hour of tutoring. And I would love to tutor you. I used to be in the classroom. I miss it. If you think you need a tutor, I would be happy to do that for you. Again, these are your tutors. I'm Shellie Harshberger. I'm your science person. Tammy's English and reading, Brandon's math. And then finally, remember that you can get some free assistance by looking at our mini lessons and our practice questions on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. So make sure you're following us on socials. Email us at prenursing@archerreview.com if you need, or if you want to reach out and get a tutor and you can't seem to line up with our schedule on our website. Last but not least, I really, really sincerely ask that you scan this QR code and give me some feedback. I listen to it, I care, and so I help tailor how the webinar works based on your feedback. So certainly give it to me. So I'll leave that up for a few minutes, but I'm going to bid you all a happy Father's Day weekend. To any of the fathers out there, hey, have a great Sunday. Enjoy your kids, enjoy your family. And until next time, study smarter, not harder with Archer Review. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.